rising from the heart of Washington, D.C., 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is more than just an address. It is the most famous house in the world, a global symbol of American power, history, and democracy. For over 220 years, it has been the home of presidents, a stage for history, and a living museum. But what if this icon, this singular symbol of American identity, is not entirely original? What if it has a twin, an older sibling, hidden in plain sight across an ocean? On the south side of Dublin, Ireland, stands Leinster House. Built decades before America was even a nation, this grand Irish palace holds the architectural DNA of the president's home. This is the story of two houses, separated by an ocean, linked by one architect, and destined to become the seats of two nations. Hi, everyone. Ha here. Hit that subscribe button and let's explore the White House's forgotten twin.
Our story begins not in America, but in the Dublin of 1745. At this time, the city was a booming, confident, and wealthy metropolis, the second city of the British Empire. Dublin society was dominated by a powerful Anglo-Irish aristocracy, and like all elite circles, it was governed by one thing: fashion. And in 1745, the fashionable side of Dublin was unequivocally the north side of the River Liffey. The south side was a desolate, unfashionable marshland. Enter our first builder, James Fitzgerald, the 20th Earl of Kildare. He was young, fabulously wealthy, and ambitious. He decided he would build the grandest townhouse Dublin had ever seen, and he would build it on the wrong side of the river. Society was aghast. Friends and rivals warned him he was mad, that he was isolating himself in a muddy bog. Fitzgerald's reply became legendary. He declared, "They will follow me wherever I go." He wasn't just building a house, he was betting his reputation that he could single-handedly shift the center of gravity of an entire city. To design this palace, he hired the most celebrated architect in Ireland, Richard Castles. The style he chose was not the common Georgian townhouse, but the far grander and more severe style of Palladianism. This was a design philosophy, not just an aesthetic. Named for the 16th century Italian architect Andrea Palladio, it was based on the perfect symmetry, classical proportions, and mathematical harmony of ancient Roman temples. This choice was a statement. It wasn't just a home, it was a temple to his family's power. From 1745 to 1748, Kildare House, as it was first known, rose from the mud. The result was a stunning three-story mansion of imposing gray Wicklow granite. Look closely, and the first hints of the White House appear. The facade is a rigid, symmetrical block. The ground floor is rusticated, meaning the stone is left rough-hewn to look strong, like a foundation. The main floor, or piano nobile, is where the important rooms are, signaled by tall, elegant windows. The entire composition is centered on a classical frontispiece, columns supporting a triangular pediment. It was a fortress of aristocratic dignity. And the interior? It was a marvel. Unlike the cramped vertical layouts of other city homes, Castles designed a house that was grand, open, and built for entertaining on a princely scale. You entered through a staggering, barrel-vaulted entrance hall, which, like the future White House, ran the full depth of the central block. This hall acted as a grand public artery, leading to the home's two most magnificent spaces. On the left, a grand staircase of dark carved mahogany. On the right, the most important room in the house, the supper room. This is where the Earl would host hundreds of guests for lavish balls. Later, a grand library was added, a soaring two-story room with a gallery, which today serves as the Irish Senate Chamber. The house was a masterpiece of 18th-century craftsmanship, filled with Italian stucco work, carved marble fireplaces, and ceilings adorned with classical gods and goddesses. It was a statement of cultural supremacy. And just as Fitzgerald had predicted, society followed him. Within 2 decades, the South Side, with Leinster House as its anchor, became the most fashionable part of Dublin. In 1766, the Earl was elevated to the title of First Duke of Leinster, and Kildare House was renamed Leinster House. It had cemented its status as the palace of Ireland's premier aristocrat, a man who lived like a king. It was, for all intents and purposes, the unofficial royal palace of Dublin. And it was there, within these very walls, that a young architect would learn the language of power he would one day export to a new republic.
Our second act begins just a few years later, in 1755, with the birth of James Hoban in County Kilkenny. Unlike the Duke of Leinster, Hoban was born to a humble tenant-farmer family. He was a Catholic in a country where Catholics were barred from owning land, voting, or holding public office. His future seemed limited. But Hoban had a talent that transcended class and religion. He could draw. He was apprenticed as a wheelwright and carpenter, learning the fundamentals of structure and form. But his true gift was for the refined art of architecture. Recognizing his talent, his local landlord sponsored his entry into a special school, the Dublin Society's Drawing School. And where was this prestigious school located? In 1776, the Dublin Society, dedicated to improving Ireland's arts and sciences, moved its operations into Leinster House. The Duke of Leinster, a great patron of the arts, leased them part of his grand palace. This is the critical link. For several years, James Hoban didn't just walk past Leinster House. He didn't just admire it from the street. He worked and studied inside it. Every day, he would walk through that grand Palladian facade. He would sketch in rooms designed by Richard Castles. He absorbed its proportions, its symmetry, its grand entrance hall, its formula for projecting dignified power. The DNA of Leinster House was imprinted on his artistic mind. After graduating, Hoban worked in Dublin for a few years, but his ambition and his religion were constraints. Across the ocean, a new nation had just won its independence, the United States of America, a republic founded on ideals of liberty, offered limitless opportunity. In 1785, James Hoban boarded a ship and sailed for Philadelphia. He quickly established himself in his new country, moving south to Charleston, South Carolina, a city with a wealthy planter class, eager to build grand homes. Hoban's elegant, Palladian-inspired style was a perfect fit. He designed the Charleston County Courthouse, a grand, robust building that still stands today. His reputation grew. He was reliable, skilled, and had a clear, dignified vision. In 1791, his work caught the eye of the most important man in America, President George Washington. Washington was busy with the grandest building project of all,
creating a new permanent capital city, the Federal City, from scratch on the banks of the Potomac. A grand president's palace was needed. Washington and his Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, launched a design competition, advertising in newspapers across the young nation. The prize, $500, or a gold medal. Architects from all over submitted plans. One was an amateur, Thomas Jefferson himself, who submitted a radical design based on a Roman dome, clearly inspired by the Pantheon. But his design was deemed too complex and perhaps too radical. Then in July 1792, James Hoban arrived in the new capital to present his design. What he unrolled was, in essence, his memory of Leinster House. The drawing was almost a direct copy. It had the same rusticated ground floor, the same piano nobile with tall, elegant windows, the same central pediment, and the same grand symmetrical facade. It was Leinster House, but subtly adapted for an American president rather than an Irish duke. George Washington loved it. It was perfect. It was grand, but not a king's palace. It was dignified, but not overly ornate. It was the perfect expression of a powerful, stable, and respectable new republic. It was, in a word, Palladian. It was Leinster House. James Hoban, the immigrant from Kilkenny, was awarded the commission to build the home of the President of the United States.
James Hoban was now in charge of a monumental construction project in the middle of a wilderness. The new federal city, which we now call Washington, D.C., was a swampy, muddy, insect-ridden construction site. The president's palace was its centerpiece. Hoban's first challenge was adapting his Irish model. George Washington, ever the hands-on leader, reviewed the plans. He requested two major changes. First, he wanted it bigger. Hoban's original plan was expanded, making the White House significantly larger than its Irish twin. Second, Washington insisted it be built of stone, not brick, to give it permanence and grandeur. The stone was sourced from the Aquia Creek quarry in Virginia. This pale, porous sandstone would give the building its famous color. The labor was immense. Hoban supervised a diverse and complex workforce. He hired skilled stonemasons from Scotland who were struggling with unemployment back home. He also utilized the labor of enslaved African Americans who quarried the stone and dug the foundations. This workforce, a mix of immigrant ambition and the harsh reality of American slavery, literally built the foundation of the president's home. The project was slow, expensive, and difficult. Hoban was a constant presence, overseeing every detail. As the building rose, its pale sandstone walls made it stand out against the muddy landscape, leading some to call it the White House, long before it was ever painted. The house was not finished when, in November 1800, its first residents moved in, President John Adams and First Lady Abigail Adams. The house was a cold, damp, and cavernous construction site. Plaster was still wet, and the main staircase wasn't even built. Abigail Adams famously wrote to her daughter that the great audience room, what we now call the East Room, was unfinished, so she was using it to hang the presidential laundry. It was a humble beginning for a house destined for greatness. Our modernization era, the equivalent of the Felton family's updates at the Hay House, comes with our third president, Thomas Jefferson, in 1801.
Jefferson, the amateur architect who had lost the design competition, now found himself living in the very house he had competed against. He famously grumbled that the house was a big box and big enough for 2 emperors, 1 pope, and the Grand Lama. But he couldn't resist the urge to fix it. He immediately set about adding his own Palladian-inspired touches, collaborating with the architect Benjamin Latrobe. This is where the White House truly begins to diverge from its Irish twin. Jefferson added the low-lying single-story wings on the east and west sides, which we now know as the east and west wings. These colonnades were a classic Palladian feature, intended to connect the main house to the service buildings, like kitchens and stables, in an elegant way. More importantly, Jefferson and Latrobe began planning for the 2 features that now define the White House: the grand porticos. The north portico, the columned front door that acts as the main entrance, and the iconic south portico, the back porch with its beautiful curved bow overlooking the south lawn. These porticos, which wouldn't be completed for many years, were a brilliant addition. They added a new layer of classical grandeur and dimension that Leinster House, with its flatter facade, lacked. So while Hoban gave the White House its bones, its Irish DNA, it was Jefferson who gave it its iconic face. The house was evolving, becoming uniquely American. It was a home for a president, a workshop for architects, and a symbol of a growing nation's confidence. But that confidence would soon be put to the ultimate test.
Our 4th era is not one of gentle modernization, but of violent destruction and miraculous rebirth. In 1812, just 12 years after the house was occupied, the United States declared war on Great Britain. For 2 years the war raged, mostly at sea and on the Canadian border. But in August 1814, the war came home. A British force, seeking revenge for the American burning of York, modern-day Toronto, marched unopposed on the nation's new capital. Washington, D.C. fell into panic. President James Madison and his government fled. Left at the president's house was First Lady Dolly Madison, a small staff, and a few soldiers. As the British approached on August 24th, Dolly Madison refused to leave until one item was secured. She ordered the full-length iconic portrait of George Washington, the one by Gilbert Stuart, to be taken down. The frame was famously bolted to the wall, so she ordered it to be broken. The canvas was rolled up and spirited away just as the British vanguard entered the city. It was an act of cultural preservation in the face of total disaster. That evening, the British soldiers, led by Admiral George Cockburn and General Robert Ross, marched into the president's house. They found the dinner table still set for 40 guests, as the Madisons had been preparing for a dinner party. The soldiers mockingly ate the presidential dinner and drank his wine, toasting to King George. Then they piled the furniture in the center of the rooms and set the house on fire. The fire raged through the night. When dawn broke, the president's house was a hollow, blackened, scorched-out shell. The sandstone walls were still standing, but the entire interior, the grand staircase, the East Room, the presidential quarters, was gone. The roof had collapsed, leaving the house open to the sky. It was a devastating, humiliating symbol of a nation on the brink of collapse. In the aftermath, the debate began. Many argued this was the end of Washington, D.C. Congressmen from the North argued to move the capital back to Philadelphia or to New York.
The federal city experiment, they claimed, had failed. But President Madison was resolute. The capital would stay. The president's house would be rebuilt. It was a statement of national resilience. And to lead this resurrection, there was only one man for the job, the original architect, James Hoban. Hoban, now nearly 60, was brought back to oversee the painstaking 3-year reconstruction. From 1815 to 1817, he directed the crews who cleared the rubble, stabilized the fire-damaged walls, and rebuilt the entire interior from scratch, following his original plans. This was his preservation era. He wasn't just saving a building, he was rebuilding a symbol. It was during this reconstruction that the building cemented its famous nickname. The exterior sandstone was badly scorched and stained from the fire. To cover the damage and restore its elegance, the entire building was painted with a thick coat of white lime-based paint. It was now, truly, the White House, a name that would become official under President Theodore Roosevelt decades later. When President James Monroe moved in 1817, the house was reborn. A phoenix risen from the ashes, stronger and more symbolic than ever. Just like the Hay House was saved by the Georgia Trust, the White House was saved by its own architect, ensuring its legacy for all future generations.
Today, the White House stands as the ultimate living museum, a home that has been continuously updated, redecorated, and restored by every family that has lived there. From the Truman's total gut renovation to Jackie Kennedy's elegant historical restoration. And its Irish twin, Leinster House, James Fitzgerald's bold gamble to move to the south side paid off. The house remained the ducal palace until 1922, when a new nation, the Irish Free State, was born. In a fitting echo of history, the new Irish government chose Leinster House as its parliament building. The two houses, born from the same Palladian mind, now serve as the seats of two independent republics. One, the home of a duke, became the home of a parliament. The other, inspired by a palace, became the home of a president. Two twins, separated by an ocean, united by an immigrant architect, and forever linked in the grand story of architecture and democracy. What did you think about the White House's Irish roots? Do you see the family resemblance? Let me know down below in the comment section. And while you're there, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an exciting episode of The Old Mansion.